On the nationalist right, many people seem to see Russia as an idyllic model for the West. They picture modestly dressed women, masculine men, a well-functioning society endowed with a high degree of social trust. Is that assessment correct? Today, we're going to rate Russia and see if it is Zaist or secretly Zygeria. Maria Pierkova writes on Al Jazeera that Russian nationalists have been essentially purged from the country. They have become political prisoners condemned under extremism laws. Today, most of the leaders of the ultra-nationalist groups that used to organize the march are either in jail or in self-imposed exile. Their supporters consider them to be politically persecuted and complain about increasing state repression. Although the Kremlin has been accused of supporting conservative and far-right political groups in Europe, at home it seems to be becoming increasingly intolerant towards groups that propagate ideas similar to their Western counterparts. In the past few years, and especially since the conflict in Ukraine erupted in 2014, the Russian authorities have cracked down on nationalist groups under the guise of criminal investigations or accusations of extremism under the infamous Anti-Extremism Law 282. So Russian nationalists are employed tactically by the state. Dugin was even installed as a movement leader to create pro-Kremlin movements that are essentially civic nationalist, but when dissident interests clash with the state, nationalists are jailed under extremism laws. On November 4, 2014, there were two events in Moscow that claimed to be the Russian March, one supporting the annexation of Crimea and the other rejecting it. In the following months, one by one, leaders of ultra-nationalist groups supporting the latter were arrested on various charges. Even saying something as banal as America First might be in the West can land you in trouble under Russian extremism statutes. In 2016, Dyomushkin was arrested for posting a photo of a previous Russian march in which a banner saying "Russian power in Russia" was visible. He was accused of spreading extremism and handed 2.5 years in prison. Several Russian nationalists were also charged with crimes. Other far-right leaders managed to escape before being arrested. Bieletsky said he fled the country fearing arrest, and he was questioned multiple times and briefly detained this year after organizing nationalists to join Navalny for an anti-government protest and march. Yuri Gorsky, also an organizer of the Russian March and former member of various ultra-nationalist groups, was charged with spreading extremism and is currently in Lithuania. Igor Artyomov, the former leader of the banned Russian All-National Union, which used to participate in the march, received political asylum in the U.S. Prominent ultra-nationalist vlogger Vyacheslav Maltsev, who at some point was associated with Great Russia and also attended Russian marches, fled from Russia after being briefly detained and is currently hiding in a European country. Maltsev called for a revolution on November 5th. Many of his supporters had previously been or were subsequently arrested. So the essence of Russian nationalism has been watered down. Those movements that remain in the face of the persecution are now all pro-Kremlin and non-ethnic in character. The movement has been co-opted into a pro-regime civic nationalism, indicating that the persecution had a successful chilling effect. Today, the anti-Putin far-right movement is extremely small. You cannot compare this to any other period of time in Russia since 1991, where you would have such a weak ultra-nationalist movement. The classical Russian nationalism in its ethnic form is a thing of the past. There are new movements that are appearing now, which are connected with the Kremlin ideologically, says Udina. The main thing for them is patriotism, the praise of the state, and adopting conservative orthodox values. In 2017, as written on DW, Russian police broke up an anti-Kremlin nationalist demonstration, arresting 263 people. Hundreds of participants at a demonstration close to the Kremlin were detained on Sunday for holding an unauthorized protest against Russian President Vladimir Putin, Moscow police said. For breaches of public order in central Moscow, 263 people have been detained. They have all been taken to local police stations, Moscow police said in a statement. Demonstrators on Saturday chanted, "Putin is a thief," and "freedom for political prisoners." In 2016, a Russian nationalist leader of the Russians' opposition movement was arrested ahead of an upcoming Russian march. Richard Arnold of the Jamestown Foundation wrote in 2016, "The former leader of the now banned Russians' opposition movement, as well as the outlawed skinhead gang Slavic Union, Dmitry Dyomushkin, was placed under house arrest by the Russian authorities on October 21st. Ostensibly, the movement was connected to an ongoing legal case against the infamous nationalist for inciting ethnic and racial tensions, Article 282 of the Russian Criminal Code, by posting extremist content to social media sites in 2011 and 2013. Did you know that Russia has hate speech laws? Because I didn't. It is outright illegal to be racist in Russia on social media. Apparently, you can be arrested for inciting ethnic tension, whatever that means. Even the United States hasn't gone this far yet. The protests surrounded various liberal laws Putin had enacted or was planning to enact. One of such was a proposal to accept guest workers from Central Asia and the Caucasus. The proposed slogans for the protests included, "Russian pride is stronger than repression. We stand. Freedom to Russia. Russia is Europe. Lustration. Desovietization. Russia for ethnic Russian power. Cancel 282. Freedom to political prisoners. The footsteps of the Russian march tell guest workers to leave. We support a visa regime. Down with immigration. Support the freedom of the Russian nation." Like American nationalists, Russian nationalists are skeptical of foreign intervention, but opposing it contravenes Putin's official party line and butts up against laws intended to preserve national security. Alexei Navalny, anti-corruption activist who was poisoned in an attempted assassination attempt a couple of years ago under circumstances that were, to say the least, suspicious, had this to say. A number of leading nationalists or nationalist-leaning opposition figures have weighed in on the implications of Demushkin's house arrest. Anti-corruption blogger and former Moscow mayoral candidate Alexei Navalny, for example, said in sardonic fashion that, quote, "It is not permitted to be conservative and not love Putin." He continued, "You can go on a talk show and say there that the most important interests of Russia are the wars in Ukraine and Syria, that it is necessary to take money from health and education, to donate your last shirt just to help Bashar al-Assad. After that you can go to rallies and meetings in support of Vladimir Putin and his wise policies. But going to Russian marches and protests on other topics is forbidden." By mentioning the war in Syria, Navalny brings up a leading complaint of the nationalist movement and its supporters, namely that the war is a colossal waste of Russian money, which could be better spent addressing what they see as the real needs of the Russian nation. So then, it appears that those in opposition to Putin's imperializing policies, his international intervention, have no room to speak at all in Russia. Either you are slavishly pro-Putin and thus pro-integrationism and pro-war, or you're an extremist. That is the political climate in modern Russia. There's nowhere for a nationalist, ethnic, nor paleo-conservative movement of any kind. Now, if you're on the European or American right, you might have the impression that Russia is like a traditional state, frozen in time by the frigid weather. That is, sadly, not true at all. Russia is suffering from the same general degradation that has afflicted all modern, liberal, industrial states. According to Euromaidan Press as of 2017, Russians now rank below Filipinos in terms of social well-being. Things are also not much better for the denizens of Moscow, as it is in the top 5 cities where, quote, life has become more uncomfortable over the last year. What's more is that the divorce rates are skyrocketing among new marriages. Social problems are mounting as a result. Divorces are now running at more than 60% of new marriages. Apparently, the supposedly trad paradise is absolutely full of prostitutes. There are now well over 1 million prostitutes in the Russian Federation, a figure that is higher than the combined total of doctors, farmers, and firemen, official statistics show. Meanwhile, according to the leader of the Silver Rose, the unregistered association of Russian sex workers, the number of sex workers in Russia exceeds 3 million. Now we're going to switch gears and take a look at Thuletide's article on Russia. Inside, he reveals that Russia is not quite the traditionalist paradise that some people perceive. First of all, according to Pew, only 22% of Russians view religion as very important in their lives, in comparison to 47% in the United States. Russia has the #1 highest abortion rate in the world, at 53.7 per 1,000 women, coming in above Vietnam, Kazakhstan, Estonia, and Belarus. Additionally, Russia ranks very high in divorce rates, at 3.9 per 1,000 people. In contrast, Canada comes in at 2.1 per 100,000. Russia also has relatively high rates of alcoholism, which should surprise no one. Russia comes in at 11.7 per capita, according to 2016 statistics. Russia is now also number 3 in the world in terms of opiate use at 1.64% of the population. The quality of Russian healthcare services comes in at 71.6 on the Health Index score, alongside heavy hitters such as Brazil or Morocco. As of 2022, Russia comes in as the 70th best country in terms of quality of life, which is literally worse than Colombia, Brazil, and again, Morocco. The Russian homicide rate is 5 to 9.9, which is about on par with America, and I don't have to say why that is. Both compare unfavorably to Canada, which is at 1.5 to 4.9. In terms of number of prisoners, Russia ranks very highly, having 329 per 100,000 people versus, say, England at 131 per 100,000. Finally, on the public sector corruption index, Russia rates at 86 versus England at 3. Finally, I want to point out, as I did in my video on Ukraine, that Russia has gone along with the central bank digital currency plans of the NWO, as well as with the global digital ID system and the pandemic response. Now, the moment we've all been waiting for, is Russia Zaist or Zygeria? We've seen how they persecute nationalists, how they set up fake pro-Putin nationalist fronts to co-opt the movement. We've seen how the country is full of prostitutes and how bad the divorce problem is. The old tide has shown us various statistics that paint a very poor picture of the country, and ultimately, we've seen them kowtow to the party line of the NWO. I think we can say definitively that Russia is Zygeria. Now, I mean no offense to Russian dissidents. Their country, like ours, is in a poor state and being run into the ground by hawkish liberals. I feel great sympathy with them, and I want to see Russia become a great Russian state for the ethnic Russian people. But the purpose of this video was to shake other Western people out of the Russian fantasy that they have in their heads. If I have done that, then I have done my job.